Hello everyone, welcome again, and do not forget to subscribe to the channel if you have not subscribed to the channel. So I'm going to play a video. It's a short clip from a European American pastor, and what he said is what is wrong with America today. And for some people, they think this is not racist, it's just preference. And people tend to think, okay, there are preferences, and when you prefer to work with some people who look like you, it is not necessarily being racist or racialist. It's just preference. Now, I'll play the video and then I'll comment on it.
When we moved to Texas, I needed to get a new cardiologist. And so my wife, she does a lot of this for me because before we had kids, she was an RN. And she knows a lot more than I do. I let her read those books. She read some medical books. Yeah. And so she's doing the research and looking at these things. And she shows me two doctors. Both of this within the same practice, same company, hospital, and saying, do you like one over the other? And one was a young white dude and one was a young black dude. And I said, I prefer the young white dude. And this is why. The reason why is not because I'm white, but because we currently live in a historical moment in the West, and particularly in these United States, where I know that both of these guys could be perfectly qualified. But I also know that if there's a chance that one of them was not qualified and was given a free pass, it'd be the black guy. I know that young white guy, there's no way he got a free pass.
Here's the thing. Many European Americans talk a lot about affirmative action, about diversity. So for those of you who do not know, affirmative action was instituted after the Civil Rights Movement because African Americans were excluded from the mainstream society. So after the Civil Rights Movement and the desegregation of schools and the dismantling of Jim Crow laws, many of them started to get integrated into the mainstream society. There had to be protections put in place because slavery and Jim Crow were hurdles to their success. They made some progress after the abolition of slavery, especially during some part of the Reconstruction era between 1865 and 1870s. Things became really dire between 1870s and the 1960s. Those laws were put in place to ensure that African Americans catch up because most of them lived in poor neighborhoods, so you could not expect a student living in suburban neighborhood and one living in rundown schools with no facility, to get the same grade and same level of support. So one of the things the government did is to say, if a child in a rundown school gets, let's say, a B, and then there's another student who is in a school that is well supported, a child who gets tutoring, child who goes to one of the best schools, gets, let's say, an A, the assumption was that this student didn't do well because of the living condition and the school and the support system. If this child with the B was in the other school, maybe he or she would get the same grade. So those laws were put in place for a reason. And I think many Americans, even if they didn't like them and they wanted them removed, they still understood why they were put in place. Now, that was affirmative action, which is now struck down by the Supreme Court in the US, because many people were saying it's discriminating against mostly European Americans, Asian Americans. So affirmative action is gone, but we also have diversity. Diversity is not just in admission, it's also used in hiring. They started to do preferential hiring. Now, many European Americans started to use that to doubt the qualifications of African Americans. So they would say, if they see a doctor or a pilot or a lawyer, they would say, oh, this is just affirmative action lawyer, or now they say diversity hire. And they're using that with Kamala Harris. So what he's saying in the video is, I understand they may be qualified, but I don't know that. So the chances of the European American doctor having been hired on affirmative action of diversity are almost none. That's what he's saying. And that even if this African American doctor became a doctor and is qualified without any affirmative action or diversity hiring, he said there's a possibility because this is something that is common in the US. So he's saying, I'm not going to take chances with my family. Now, on face value, As a human being, you can say this is understandable because this is just preference. It's about your family. It's about your kids. You can't take anything to chance. So people would understand. But this is what bothers me among many many European Americans, is that they tend to assume that the preference started in the 1960s. Now, if you go back to the years of slavery, during Reconstruction, the years of Jim Crow, preferential treatment was the norm. When Michelle Obama talked about the affirmative action of generational wealth, this is what she was talking about, that many European Americans benefited from group thinking, from affirmative action for almost 300 years. So when they pretend now that they were always admitted because they were qualified, that's a lie. There were always preferential treatment. Even today, there's something they call legacy students who are family members of well-placed, maybe wealthy alumni. So they give money to universities, so their children are admitted not based on merit, but based on preference. This is still now a problem. You have heard the case of some Hollywood A-listers who use the same to have their children admitted. So by pretending that African Americans are the ones who are admitted based on preference, it's a historical lie. It's always about the one who has the power to tell stories and the other stories are not had. Affirmative action is part of Western society. If you go back to even in Europe, with aristocrats, with the families of royalties, they were not treated based on merit. Merit is something it's recent. There was never a merit-based system across racial lines. It never existed. There was always professional treatment. So when they say these things, it makes me wonder, do they know history or do they ignore it? Because by pretending that all European American doctors and lawyers were admitted by merit is to ignore history. It's also to ignore the realities of what is happening today. I'm going to read to you a letter. Dear Mr. Hood, acknowledgement is made of your letter of July 30th, enclosing your application for admission for our School of Medicine. I am sorry, I must write you that we are not authorized to consider for admission a member of the Negro race. I regret that we cannot help you. Yours sincerely, L.L. Clark, Director of Admissions. He is denied admission not because he wasn't qualified, but because he belongs to quote-unquote Negro race. So when European Americans, especially people on the political right, speak about DEI and affirmative action, it has been part of them. The only problem is when people who are marginalized start to ask some part of the national cake, the narratives are created to ensure that they remain where they are. So when he talks about this young man who is very qualified, but he's using his skin color, and most people on the political right would say, oh, we've ignored Martin Luther King content of the character, that we should judge people by the content of the character, not by the color of the skin. But what is this guy using? He's using the color of the skin. He's not even seeing to talk to the colleagues and say, okay, patience, his patience and his track record. These are things you can easily find out. But he's not. He doesn't really care. This is about people who cannot be held accountable. If you know you cannot be held accountable, you can pretty much say anything.